Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see a nice packed room here in our new building. My name is Alexis Abramson, Dean of Thayer School of Engineering at Dartmouth, and it's truly a pleasure to welcome you all to this very special event, a conversation with Mira Murati, one of our nation's foremost leaders in artificial intelligence and also a Dartmouth Engineering alum. Before we get started, I want to extend a special welcome to a special guest, Joy Bolawini, who is also renowned for her work in AI ethics, and algorithmic justice. She'll also be receiving her honorary degree from Dartmouth tomorrow. And a warm welcome to Mira and all of you who either are part of her family now or are part of her family when she was here at Dartmouth, including her brother, Ernal Murati, also a Thayer alum from the class of 2016. Thank you to our partners at the Newcomb Institute for Computational Science and the Department of Computer Science. From Dartmouth's very first seminal conference on artificial intelligence in 1956, to our current multidisciplinary research on large language models and precision health, Dartmouth has long been at the forefront of AI innovation. So we are especially thrilled to have Mira, Chief Technology Officer at OpenAI and Thayer School of Engineering's class of 2012, with us today. She is known for her pioneering work on some of the most talked about AI technologies of our time. At OpenAI, she has spearheaded the development of transformative models like ChatGPT and DALL, setting the stage for future generative AI technologies. Now, during her time as a student at Thayer, she applied her engineering skills to design and built hybrid race cars with Dartmouth's Formula Racing team. Tomorrow at commencement, she will receive an honorary Doctorate of Science from Dartmouth. Finally, moderating our conversation today is Jeff Blackburn, Dartmouth class of 1991 and current Dartmouth trustee. Jeff's extensive career has centered on the growth of global digital media and technology. He served as Senior Vice President of Global Media and Entertainment at Amazon until 2023, and has had various leadership positions at the company. His insights into the intersection of technology and media and entertainment will certainly make sure we have an engaging conversation today. So without further ado, I'll turn the conversation over. Please join me in welcoming Mira Murati and Jeff Blackburn.
Thank you, Alexis. And this beautiful building, so nice. Mira, thank you so much for coming here and spending time. I can only imagine how crazy your days are now.
It's great to be here.
It is so nice of you to take this time for everybody here.
Really happy to be here.
And I want to get right to it because I know everybody just wants to hear what's going on in your life and what you're building, because it's just fascinating. Maybe we should just start with you, and you leave Thayer, you go to Tesla for a bit, then OpenAI. If you could just describe kind of that period, and then joining OpenAI in the early days.
Yeah, so I was right after Thayer. I actually worked in aerospace briefly, and then I sort of realized that aerospace was kind of slow moving, and I was very interested in Tesla's mission and, of course, really innovative challenges in building basically a sustainable future for transportation. And I decided to join then. And after working on Model S and Model X, I thought, I don't really want to become a car person. I kind of want to work on different challenges at the intersection of really advancing society forward in some way, but also in doing this really hard engineering challenges. And at the time when I was at Tesla, I got very interested in self-driving cars and sort of, the intersection of these technologies, computer vision and AI, applying them to self-driving cars. And I thought, okay, I'd like to learn more about AI, but in different domains. And that's when I joined a startup where I was leading engineering and product to apply AI and computer vision in the domain of spatial computing. So thinking about the next interface of computing. And at the time, I thought it was going to be virtual reality and augmented reality. Now, I think it's a bit different. But I thought, what if you could use your hands to interact with very complex information, whether it's, formulas or molecules or, concepts in topology. You can just learn about these things and interact with them in a much more intuitive way, and that expands your learning. So it turned out VR was a bit too early then, and so. But this gave me enough to learn about AI in a different domain, and sort of I think my career has always been kind of at the intersection of technology and various applications, and it gave me a different perspective of how far along AI was and what it could be applied to.
So a Tesla self-driving, you saw machine learning, deep learning. You could see where this was going. Yeah.
Yes.
Did you work at the
not
Elon?
Clearly, I did.
You
Yes,
did,
in the
yeah.
last year especially. But it wasn't totally clear where it was going. It was at the time it was still, apply AI to narrow applications, not generally. You're applying it to very narrow, specific problems, and it was the same in VR and AR. And from then, I thought, I don't really want to just apply it to specific problems. I want to learn about just the research and really understand what is going on. And from there, then go apply it to other things. So this is when I joined OpenAI, and OpenAI's mission was very appealing to me. It was a nonprofit back then, and the mission hasn't changed, the structure has changed, but when I joined 6 years ago, it was a nonprofit geared to build safe artificial general intelligence, and it was the only other company doing this other than DeepMind. Now, of course, there are a lot of companies that are sort of building some
Handful.
Version of this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how
was
the
the path.
journey started to OpenAI.
Got it. And so you've been building a lot since you were there. I mean, maybe we could just, for the group, just some AI basics of, machine learning, deep learning, now AI. It's all related, but it is something different. So, what is going on there, and how does that come out in a ChatGPT or a DALL-E or your video product? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, so, it's not something radically new. In a sense, we're building on decades and decades of human endeavor. And in fact, it did start here. And what has happened in, let's say, the last decades is this combination of these three things, where you have neural networks, and then a ton of data, and a ton of compute. And you combine these three things, and you get these really transformative AI systems or models that it turns out they can do these amazing things, like general tasks. But it's not really clear how. Deep learning just works. And of course, we're trying to understand and apply tools and research to understand how these systems actually work. But we know it works from just having done it for the past few years. And we have also seen the trajectory of progress and how these systems have gotten better over time. When you look at systems like GPT-3, large language models that we deployed about 3.5 years ago. GPT-3 was able to sort of, first of all, the goal of this model is just to predict the next token.
It's really next word prediction.
Yes,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah.
And then we found out that if you give this model this objective to predict the next token, and you've trained it on a ton of data and you're using a lot of compute, what you also get is this model that actually understands language at a pretty similar
It's
level
read
to
a
how
lot
we
of
can.
books. It's read all the books. It
Basically,
kind of
all the
knows what word should
content
come next.
on the internet, but it's not memorizing what's next. It is really generating an understanding of its own understanding of the pattern of the data that it has seen previously. And then we found that, okay, it's not just language. Actually, if you put different types of data in there, like code, it can code too. So actually, it doesn't care what type of data you put in there. It can be images, it can be video, it can be sound, and it can do exactly the same thing.
Oh, we'll get to the images. Yeah. But yes, text prompt can give you images or video, and now you're seeing even the reverse.
Yes, exactly. So you can do, so we found out that this formula actually works really well. Data, compute, and deep learning. And you can put different types of data, you can increase the amount of compute, and then the performance of these AI systems gets better and better. And this is what we refer to as scaling laws. They're not actual laws, it's essentially like a statistical prediction of the capability of the model improving as you put in more data and more compute into it. And this is what's driving AI progress today.
Why did you start with the chatbot? Just so
In terms of product, actually we started with the API. We didn't really know how to commercialize GPT-3. It's actually very, very difficult to commercialize AI technology. And initially, we took this for granted, and we were very focused on building the technology and doing research. And we thought, here is this amazing model. Commercial partners, take it and go build amazing products on top of it. And then we found out that that's actually very hard. And so this is why we started doing it ourselves.
That led you to build a chatbot because you just wanted it. Yeah.
Yes, because we were trying to figure out, okay, why is it so hard for these really amazing, successful companies to actually turn this technology into a helpful product? And it's because it's a very odd way to build products. You're starting from capabilities. You're starting from a technology. You're not starting from what is the problem in the world that I'm trying to address. It's a very general capability.
Right. And so that leads to pretty quickly what you just described there, which is more data, more compute, more intelligence. How intelligent is this going to get? I mean, it sounds like your description is the scaling of this is pretty linear. You add more of those elements and it gets smarter.
Yeah.
How quickly has it gotten smarter, ChatGPT, in the last couple of years, and how quickly will it get to, maybe human level intelligence?
So yeah, these systems are already human level in specific tasks, and of course, in a lot of tasks they're not. If you look at the trajectory of improvement, systems like GPT-3 were maybe, let's say, toddler level intelligence, and then systems like GPT-4 are more like smart high schooler intelligence. And then in the next couple of years, we're looking at PhD level intelligence for specific tasks. So things are changing and improving pretty rapidly.
Meaning like a year from now?
Yeah, a year and a half, let's say, yeah.
Where you're having a conversation with ChatGPT and it seems smarter than you.
In some things, yes. In a lot of things, yes.
Maybe a year away from that.
I mean, yeah, could be.
Roughly.
Pretty close.
Roughly. Well, I mean, it does lead to these other questions, and I know you've been very vocal on this, which I'm happy and proud that you are doing on the safety aspects of it. But I mean, people do want to hear from you on that. So, I mean, what about 3 years from now when it's unbelievably intelligent. It can pass every single bar exam everywhere and every test we've ever done. And then it just decides it wants to connect to the internet on its own and start doing things. And is that real? And is that something you're thinking about as, as the CTO and leading the product direction?
Yes, we're thinking a lot about this. It's definitely real that you will have AI systems that will have agentic capabilities, connect to the internet, talk to each other, agents connecting to each other and doing tasks together, or agents working with humans and collaborating seamlessly. So sort of working with AI like we work with each other today. In terms of safety, security, the societal impacts aspects of this work, I think these things are not an afterthought. It can be that you sort of develop the technology and then you have to figure out how to deal with these issues. You kind of have to build them alongside the technology and actually in a deeply embedded way to get it right. And for capabilities and safety, they're actually not separate domains. They go hand in hand. It's much easier to direct a smarter system by telling it, okay, just don't do these things. They need to be to direct a less intelligent system. It's sort of like training, a smarter dog versus a dumber dog. And so intelligence and safety go hand in hand.
It understands the guardrails better because
Right,
it's smarter.
yeah, exactly. And so there is this whole debate right now around, do you do more safety or do you do more capability research? And I think that's a bit misguided because, of course, you have to think about, the safety into deploying a product and the guardrails around that. But in terms of research and development, they actually go hand in hand. And from our perspective, the way we're thinking about this is approaching it very scientifically. So let's try to predict the capabilities that these models will be the capabilities that these models will have before we actually finish training. And then along the way, let's prepare the guardrails for how we handle them. That's not really been the case in the industry so far. We train these models, and then there are these emergent capabilities, we call them, because they emerge. We don't know they're going to emerge. We can see sort of the statistical performance, but we don't know whether that statistical performance means that the model is better at translation or at doing, biochemistry or doing or coding or something else. And developing this new science of capability prediction helps us prepare for what's to come. And that means...
So you're saying all that safety work, it's kind of consistent with your development. It's a similar path.
Yeah, so you have to kind of bring it along.
But what about these issues, Mira, like, the video of Vladimir Zelensky saying, "We surrender." The Tom Hanks video, or a dentist ad, or I can't remember what it was. What about these types of uses? Is that in your sphere, or does there need to be regulation around that, or how do you see that playing out?
So I mean, my perspective on this is that this is our technology, so it's our responsibility how it's used, but it's also a shared responsibility with society, civil society, government, content makers, media, and so on, to figure out, how it's used. But in order to make it a shared responsibility, you need to bring people along, you need to give them access, you need to give them tools to understand and to provide guardrails. And
those things are kind of hard to stop, though, right?
Well, I think it's not possible to have zero risk.
Yeah.
But it's really a question of how do you minimize risk?
Right.
And providing people the tools to do that. And in the case of government, for example, it's very important to bring them along and give them early access to things, educate them on what's going on.
Governments.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure, and
Yeah.
regulators. And I think perhaps the most significant thing that ChatGPT did was bring AI into the public consciousness, give people a real intuitive sense for what the technology is capable of and also of its risks. It's a different thing when you read about it versus when you try it, and you try it in your business and you see, okay, it cannot do these things, but it can do this other amazing thing, and this is what it actually means for the workforce or for my business, and it allows people to prepare.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, just these interfaces that you've created, ChatGPT, DALL, are informing people about what's coming. I mean, you can use it. You can see now what's underneath. Do you think there's, just to finish on the government point, I mean, let's just talk the US right now. Do you wish there was certain regulations that we're actually just putting into place right now before you get to that year or two from now when it's extremely intelligent, like a little bit scary? So are there things that should just be done now?
We've been advocating for more regulation on the frontier models, which will have this, amazing capabilities that also have a downside because of misuse. And we've been very open with policymakers and working with regulators on that, on the more sort of near-term and smaller models. I think it's good to allow for a lot of breadth and richness in the ecosystem, and not let people that don't have as many resources in compute or data not block the innovation in those areas. So we've been advocating for more regulation in the frontier systems where the risks are much higher, and also you can kind of get ahead of what's coming versus trying to keep up with changes that are already happening really rapidly.
But you probably don't want Washington, D.C., regulating your release of GPT-5. Like that you can or cannot do this.
I mean, it depends, actually. It depends on the regulation. So there is a lot of work that we already do that has now been sort of, codified in the White House commitments, and that's work that we've already been done, and it actually informed the White House commitments, or what the UN Commission is doing with the principles for AI deployment. And usually I think the way to do it is to actually do the work, understand what it means in practice, and then create regulation based on that. And this is what has happened so far. Now, getting ahead of these frontier systems requires that we do a lot more forecasting and science of capability prediction in order to come up with correct regulation on that.
Well, I hope the government has people that can understand what you're doing.
It seems like more and more folks are joining the government that have better understanding of AI, but not enough.
Okay. In terms of industries, you have the best seat maybe in the world to just see how this is going to impact different industries. And I mean, it already is in finance and content and media and healthcare. But what industries do you think, when you look forward, just you think are going to be most impacted by AI and the work that you're doing at OpenAI?
Yeah, this is sort of similar to the question that I used to get from entrepreneurs when we started building a product on top of GPT-3, where people would ask me, what is this good, like what can I do with it? What is it good for? And I would say everything, so just try it. And so it's kind of similar in the sense that I think it will affect everything, and there's not going to be an area that won't be affected in terms of cognitive work and cognitive, the cognitive labor and cognitive work. Maybe it's going to take a little bit longer to get into the physical world, But I think everything will be impacted by it. Right now, we've seen, so I'd say there's been a bit of a lag in areas that have a lot of, that are high risk, such as healthcare or legal domains. And so there is a bit of a lag there, and rightfully so. First, you want to understand and bring it in use cases that are lower risk, medium risk, really make sure those are handled with confidence before applying it to things that are higher risk. And initially there should be more human supervision, and then the delegation should change, and to the extent that it can be more collaborative.
Are there use cases that you personally love or are seeing or are about to see?
Yeah, so I think basically the first part of anything that you're trying to do, whether it's creating new designs, whether it's coding or writing an essay or writing an email or basically everything, the first part of everything that you're trying to do becomes so much easier. And that's been my favorite use of it. So far, I've
draft
already
for
used
everything.
it. Yeah,
basically.
first draft for
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Like it's so much faster. It lowers the barrier to doing something, and you can kind of focus on the part that's a bit, more creative and more difficult. Especially in coding, you can sort of outsource a lot of the tedious work.
Documentation and all
Yeah,
that kind of stuff.
documentation. But in industry, we've seen so many applications. Customer service is definitely a big application with chatbots, and writing, also analysis, because right now we've sort of connected a lot of tools to the core model, and this makes the models far more usable and more productive. So you have tools like code analysis. It can actually analyze a ton of data. You can dump all sorts of data in there, and it can help you analyze and filter out the data. Or you could use images, and you could use browsing tool. So if you're preparing, let's say, a paper, the research part of the work can be done much faster and in a more rigorous way. So I think this is kind of the next layer that's going to be added to productivity, adding these tools to the core models and making it very seamless. The model decides when to use, say, the analysis tool versus search versus something else.
Write a program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Has it watched every TV show and movie in the world, and is it gonna start writing scripts and making films?
Well, it's a tool, right? And so it certainly can do that as a tool. And I expect that we will collaborate with it, and it's going to make our creativity expand. And right now, if you think about how humans consider creativity, we see it as sort of this very special thing that's only accessible to these very few talented people out there. And these tools actually make it lower the barrier for anyone to think of themselves as creative, and expand their creativity. So in that sense, I think it's actually going to be really incredible.
Yeah, it could give me 200 different cliffhangers for the end of episode 1 or whatever.
Right.
Yes. Very easily.
And you can extend the story. The story never ends. You can just
keep going.
continue.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm done writing, but you keep going. Yeah. That's interesting.
But I think it's really going to be a collaborative tool, especially in the creative spaces, where
I do too.
Yeah, more people will become more
There's
creative.
some fear right now.
Yes,
but
for
you're
sure.
saying that'll switch, and humans will figure out how to make the creative part of the work just better. And
I think so. And some creative jobs maybe will go away, but maybe they shouldn't have been there in the first place. if the content that comes out of it is not very high quality. But I really believe that using it as a tool for education, creativity will expand our intelligence and creativity and imagination.
Well, people thought CGI and things like that were going to wreck the film industry at the time.
Yeah.
They were quite scared. This is, I think, a bigger, a bigger thing. But yeah, anything new like that, the immediate reaction is going to be like, oh God, this is, but I hope that you're right about film and TV. Okay, the job part you raised, and let's forget Hollywood stuff, but there's a lot of jobs that people are worried about that they think are at risk. What's your view on job displacement in AI and really not even just the work you're doing at OpenAI, just overall? Should people be really worried about that? And which kind of jobs? Or how do you see it all working out?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that we don't really understand the impact that AI is going to have on jobs yet. And the first step is to actually help people understand what these systems are capable of, what they can do, integrate them in their workflows, and then start predicting and forecasting the impact. And also, I think people don't realize how much these tools are already being used, and that's not being studied at all. And so we should be studying what's going on right now with the nature of work, the nature of education, and that's going to help us predict for how to prepare for these increased capabilities. In terms of jobs specifically, I'm not an economist, but I certainly anticipate that a lot of jobs will change. Some jobs will be lost, some jobs will be gained. We don't know specifically what it's going to look like, but you can imagine a lot of jobs that are repetitive that are just strictly repetitive, and people are not advancing further.
People like
those would be repetitive.
QA and testing code and things like that, those jobs are better
Unless
done.
they are, yes, and if
Yeah.
it's strictly just that,
Yeah.
or strictly.
And that's just one example. There's many things like that.
Many
Do you
things.
think there'll be enough jobs created elsewhere to compensate for that?
I think there are going to be a lot of jobs created, but the weight of how many jobs are created, how many jobs are changed, how many jobs are lost, I don't know.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone knows really, because it's not being rigorously studied, and it really should be. And yeah, but I think the economy will transform, and there is going to be a lot of value created by these tools. And so the question is, how do you harness this value? If the nature of jobs really changes, then how are we distributing sort of the economic value into society? Is it through public benefits? Is it through UBI? Is it through some other new system? So there are a lot of questions to explore and figure out.
So maybe there's a big role for higher ed in that work that you're describing there. It's just not quite happening yet.
Yeah.
What else for higher ed and this future of AI? Like, what do you think is the role of higher ed and what you see and how this is evolving?
I think really figuring out how we use these tools and AI to advance education, because I think one of the most powerful applications of AI is going to be in education, advancing our creativity and knowledge. And we have an opportunity to basically build super high quality education, and very accessible and ideally free for anyone in the world, in any of the languages or cultural nuances that you can imagine. You can really have customized understanding and customized education for anyone in the world. And of course, in institutions like Dartmouth, the classrooms are smaller and you have a lot of attention. But still, you can imagine having just one-on-one tutoring. even here, let alone in the rest of the
Supplementing.
world.
Yeah.
Yes, that is because we don't spend enough time learning how to learn, right? That sort of happens very late, like maybe in college, and that is such a fundamental thing, how you learn. Otherwise, you can waste a lot of time, and the classes, the curriculum, the problem sets, everything can be customized to how you actually learn as an individual.
So you think it could really, at a place like Dartmouth, it could complement some of the learning that's
Oh,
happening,
absolutely,
just to have
yeah.
AI as tutors and whatnot. Should we open it up? Do you mind taking some questions from the audience? Is that okay?
Happy to, yeah.
All right. Why don't we do that? Dave, you want to start?
One of Dartmouth's first computer scientists, John Kemeny, once gave a lecture about how every computer program that humans build embeds human values into that program, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And what I'm wondering is, what human values do you think are embedded in GPT products? Or, put a different way, how should we embed values in, like respect, equity, fairness, honesty, integrity, things like that, into these kinds of tools?
That's a great question and a really hard one. And something that we've been thinking about for years. So right now, if you look at these systems, a lot of the values are basically put in the data, and that's the data in the internet, licensed data, also data that comes through human contractors that will label certain problems or questions. And each of these inputs has specific values, so that's a collection of their values, and that matters. And then once you actually put these products into the world, I think you have an opportunity to get a much broader collection of values by putting it in the hands of many, many people. So right now, ChatGPT, we have a free offering of ChatGPT that has the most capable systems. And it's used by over 100 million people in the world, and each of these people can provide feedback into ChatGPT. And if they allow us to use the data, we will use it to sort of to create this aggregate of values that makes the system better, more aligned with what people want it to do. But that's sort of the default system. What you kind of want on top of it is also a layer where for customization, where each community can sort of have their own values. Let's say a school, a church, a country, even a state. They can provide their own values that are more specific and more precise on top of this default system that has basic human values. And so we're working on ways to do that as well. But it's actually, it's obviously a really difficult problem, because you have the human problem where we don't agree on things, and then you have the technology problem. And on the technology problem, I think we've made a lot of progress. We have methods like reinforcement learning with human feedback, where you give people a chance to provide their values into the system. We have just developed this thing we call the spec, that provides transparency into the values that are into the system. And we're building a sort of feedback mechanism where we collect input and data in how to advance the spec. You can think of it as like a constitution for AI systems, but it's a living one that it evolves over time, because our values also evolve over time, and it becomes more precise. It's something we're working on a lot, and I think right now we're thinking about basic values, but as the systems become more and more complex, we're going to have to think about more granularity in the values.
Can you keep
and
it
that's
from like getting angry?
getting angry.
Yeah, Is that one of the values?
Well, that should be, no, so that should actually be up to you. So if you as a user,
Oh, if you want an angry
yes,
chatbot,
if you
can
want an
have it.
angry chatbot, you should have an angry chatbot, yeah.
Okay, right here. Yeah.
Hello, thank you. Dr. Joy here. Really, and also congratulations on the honorary degree and all you've been doing with OpenAI. I'm really curious how you're thinking about both creative rights and biometric rights. And so earlier you were mentioning maybe some creative jobs ought not to exist. And you've had many creatives, right, who are thinking about issues of consent, of compensation, of having, whether it's proprietary models or even open source models, right, where the data is taken from the internet. So really curious about your thoughts on consent and compensation as it deals with creative rights. And since we're in a university, you know, the multi-part question piece. So the other thing is thinking about biometric rights. And so when it comes to the voice, when it comes to faces and so forth. So with the recent controversy around the voice of Sky and how you can also have people who sound alike, people who look alike, and all of the disinformation threats coming up in such a heavy election year, would be very curious about your perspective on the biometric rights aspects as well.
Yeah, so on, okay, I'll start with the last part on. We've done a ton of research on voice technologies, and we didn't release them until recently, precisely because they pose so many risks and issues. But it's also important to kind of bring society along, give access in a way that you can have guardrails and control the risks, and let other people study and make advances in issues like, for example, we're partnering with institutions to help us think about human AI interaction. Now that you have voice and video that are very emotionally evocative modalities, and we need to start understanding how these things are going to play out and what to prepare for. In that particular case, the voice of Sky was not Scarlett Johansson's, and it was not meant to be, and it was a completely parallel process. I was running the selection of the voice, and our CEO was having conversations with Scarlett Johansson, but you know, out of respect for her, we took it down. And some people see some similarities. These things are subjective, and I think you can sort of, yeah, you can kind of come up with red teaming processes where if the voice, for example, was deemed to be super similar to a very well-known public voice, then maybe you don't select that specific one. In our red teaming, this didn't come up. But that's why it's important to also have more extended red teaming to catch these things early if needed. But more broadly, with the issue of biometrics, I think our strategy here is to give access to a few people, initially experts or red teamers that help us understand the risk and capabilities very well. Then we build mitigations, and then we give access to more people as we feel more confident around those mitigations. So we don't allow for people to make their own voices with this technology because we're still studying the risks and we don't feel confident that we can handle misuse in that area yet. But we feel good about handling misuse with the guardrails that we have on very specific voices in a small state right now, which is essentially extended red teaming. And then when we extend it to 1,000 users, our alpha release, we will be working very closely with these users, gathering feedback and understanding the edge cases so we can prepare for these edge cases as we expand use to, say, 100,000 people. And then it's going to be 1 million, and then 100 million, and so on. But it's done with a lot of control, and this is what we call iterative deployment. And if we can all get comfortable around these use cases, then we just won't release them in this specific to extended users or for these specific use cases, we will probably, try to lobotomize the product in a certain way, because capability and risk go hand in hand. But we're also working on a lot of research to help us deal with issues of content provenance and content authenticity. So people have tools to understand if something is a deep fake or misspread, misinformation, and so on. Since the beginning of OpenAI, actually, we've been working on studying misinformation, and we've built a lot of tools like watermarking, content policies that allow us to manage the possibility of misinformation, especially this year, given that it's a global election year. We've been intensifying that work even more. But this is extremely challenging area that we, as the makers of technology and products, need to do a lot of work on, but also partner with civil society and media and content makers to figure out how to address these issues. When we make technologies like audio or Sora, the first people that we work with after the red teamers that study the risks are the content creators, to actually understand how the technology would help them and how do you build a product that is both safe and useful and helpful and that actually advances society. And this is what we did with DALL-E, and this is what we're doing with Sora, our video generation model again. And the first part of your question was
Creative rights. So for the
creative rights.
Right,
Yeah.
about compensation, consent,
Yes.
control, and credit.
So that's also very important and challenging. Right now, we do a lot of partnerships with media companies, and we also give people a lot of control on how their data is used in the product. So if they don't want their data to be used to improve the model, or for us to do any research or train on it, that is totally fine. We do not use the data. And then for just the creator community in general, we give access to these tools early, so we can hear from them first on how they would want to use it and build products that are most useful. And also, these things are research preview, so we don't have to build product at all costs. We'd only do it if we can figure out a modality that's actually helpful in advancing people forward. And we're also experimenting with methods to basically creator tools that allow people to be compensated for data contribution. This is quite tricky, both from technical perspective and also just building a product like that, because you have to sort of figure out how much a specific amount of data, how much value it creates in a model that has been trained afterwards. And maybe individual data would be very difficult to gauge how much value that would provide. But if you can sort of create consortiums of an aggregate data and pools where people can provide their data, maybe that would be better. So for the past, I'd say, 2 years, we've been experimenting with various versions of this. We haven't deployed anything, but we've been experimenting on the technical side and trying to really understand the technical problem. And we're a bit further along, but it's a really difficult issue.
It is. I bet there'll be a lot of new companies trying to build solutions for you for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so hard.
It is.
Yeah. How about right there? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and taking off your time and coming to talk to us. My question is pretty simple. If you had to come back to school today, you found yourself again at Thayer or at Dartmouth in general, what would you do again and what you would not do again? What would you major in? Or would you get involved in more things? Something like that.
I think I would study the same things, but maybe with less stress. Yeah, I think I still study math and maybe I would take more computer science courses actually. But yeah, I would stress less because then you study with more curiosity and more joy, and that's more productive. But yeah, I remember as a student, I was always a bit stressed about what was going to come after. And if I knew what I knew now, and to my younger self, I'd say, and actually everyone would tell me, don't be stressed, but somehow it didn't. When I talk to older alums, they'd always say, like, try to enjoy it and be fully immersed and be less stressed. I think, though, on specific courses, it's good to have, especially now, a very broad range of subjects, and get a bit of understanding of everything. I find that both at school and after, because even now I work in a research organization, I'm constantly learning. You never stop. That is very helpful to kind of understand a little bit of everything.
Thank you so much, because I'm
Thank
sure
you.
your life is stressful. But
Thank you so much.
thank you for being here today, and also thank you for the incredibly important work you're doing for society, quite honestly. It's really important, and I'm glad you're in the seat.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you from all of us here there in Dartmouth as well. So I thought that would be a good place to end on, too. Some good advice for our students. So what a fascinating conversation, and just wanted to thank you all again for coming. Enjoy the rest of commencement weekend.